Hello. Today we're going to be talking about blocks, how we insert blocks, and how we manage and edit and introduce blocks. But first, let's define what blocks are. Let's us understand what are blocks for and how we use them and why we need them in our drawing. Now, blocks normally are when you tell AutoCAD that you have a set of objects or lines that even though they're not touching each other, I still want you to treat them as a single object. Now, these are sort of saved like a sub file inside your file, and so they are formed together, and you can edit them after you introduce them and after you set them up and start using them and inserting them into your drawing as many times as you want without having to copy or redraw the same object over and over. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to draw any objects you have. I'm going to activate the L command, which is line. So those, what I'm going to be drawing are going to be treated at first as single individual lines. So I'm going to say, I'm going to draw this star that we usually draw for the sake of this tutorial. Okay. So L again for the star, and I'm gonna start drawing my star like this, and then I'm gonna have, say, a rectangle that is not touching my objects, and I'm gonna draw a circle. And then I'm gonna connect them with, well, you know what, they don't have to be connected. So those are the three objects that I have right now that I would like to tell AutoCAD that I want you to treat them as a single object. I'm going to be using them a lot, so I want you to save them for me and allow me to be able to insert them in the future. So what I'm going to do right now, after I've drawn my first object, I'm going to go ahead and type B for block, and the first comment, or the first, sorry, not comment, the first command you get on the command list right here is the block. So I'm going to hit enter so that I activate the block. And it takes me to this block definition window where it asks me to give it a name, obviously. Now, as we said, this is a sub object or a sub file that is saved inside your file, so you naturally need to give it a name. So right now we're going to give it test objects or test block name. The next point is that it's going to ask me to specify the base point. So there are multiple ways of specifying the base point. You can enter the X, Y, and Z coordinates, or you can, which is the way I find more useful and makes more sense to me, I'm going to pick the pick point from the drawing. So I'm going to click on this icon right here next to pick point, and it's going to take me back to the workspace where I drew my objects. So it's right here. I can use my my left mouse button with a short click where I want to specify the point where I want this object to be picked or this block to be picked from. It can be any point on the object, inside the drawings, or inside the objects, or outside of them. So it can be a point right far away from them or a point close. Of course, I recommend you choose something that is close and that makes sense. So you need to think of, what is this block? What points will I know when I want to insert that block? So where is the insertion point going to be? In my case, I'm going to say I want the insertion point to be the center of this circle right here. It can be, as I said, any point on the objects, on the lines, inside the space, or outside the drawing. That's perfectly fine. But as I said, choose your pick point wisely, and you'll know why in a minute. So I'm going to say I want this point. So I'm going to click on the left button of my mouse, just a regular short click, and then remove my finger off the button. And it should take me back to the block window, to the block formation window or definition window. And there it is. The next point, or the next step, is to specify the objects. So yes, I know this is the insertion point now, but what are the objects that you want them to be involved or included in the block that you're forming right now? So I'm gonna, again, as we said before, there are multiple ways of specifying the blocks. You can choose your objects from a list of objects that you have in your document. I find this a bit too complicated, especially when you have too many objects in the drawing. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the select objects from the view. Again, once I click here, it's going to take me back to the workspace. And I'm going to select the objects just like I select any objects in my drawing using the same techniques we explained in earlier tutorials. Once I'm done, it's still waiting for me to select objects. As we said, we can select multiple objects. They can be connected, they can be disconnected, they can be far away from each other, close to each other. That's perfectly fine. So once you're done selecting, all you have to do is right click on your mouse button to tell AutoCAD that you are done selecting, and it will automatically take you back to the window that I am at right now, which is the block definition window. Now, feel free to edit these options right now. I always like to have allow exploding tick on, because if later on I wanted to edit a single entry or a single entity from this block, I'm always able to explode it and return it back to its original object and be able to edit it as I find appropriate. Now, one more thing that I need to change, always make sure that the units of the block match the document that you're working with. As we mentioned in earlier tutorials, we're working with millimeters. So I'm going to make sure that the units remain millimeters and not inches. I think the default is normally whatever your document units are. Now, right here, I always like to add a small description. It comes in handy. So I'm going to say, this is a set of random objects for illustration purposes. I can't see, my screen's a bit too small. So illustration purposes. Now, just one thing before I close the window, notice how the objects, as soon as I chose the objects in my block, they seemed to appear here in a little thumbnail that tells you what are the objects that are included in the block and how it's going to look like when the block is formed. Now, once we're done, I'm going to click on OK. And now nothing has changed in my view, except for when I want to select my objects. Now those became a single object, and the pick point is the center of the circle that I have chosen as the base of the insertion point. Now, what if I formed my block and I want to use it again? So I want to add another copy into my drawing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out. Sorry, it's lagging. Just give it some time. It will eventually zoom out, just give it some time. And I'm going to move there. And all I have to do is go to at the home tab, at the insert tab. All I have to do is click on this insert button right here. And a list of all the blocks that I have in this document will appear. Alternatively, you can type insert on your keyboard. Once you type insert, it automatically opens this window right here. You can open the blocks that are in the drawing, that are used in this drawing, or you can use the most recent blocks that you have used most recently. Now we have formed this one right now, so it is in the most recent blocks. So feel free to choose whatever block you want. So I'm going to go ahead and choose it from here. If you choose to go to the old version or to the icon, so you can just scroll down right here until you find the block that you want to add in your drawing, and then select it and place it in the drawing. Right now I'm going to use this and double click on it, and you can see that now I can easily insert another copy of that block with the insertion point that I have picked when I first formed the block. Once I click here, I can always add as many copies as I want from the block insert block command. Now, what if something happened and we decided that this is no longer going to be a star? We need to move some of the objects around, and we need these changes to affect all the blocks that were originally added to this document. So notice how we've added the block 3 times. So we have the same block inserted in 3 versions or 3 copies in this document. So all I have to do is pick any of them and double click on it, and it will show me this menu where it has again all the blocks that are in my file. So you can see right here that there is a thumbnail that shows you what is this block, and this is the description that we have placed when we were forming the block, or when we were introducing the block. And naturally this is the name that we have given the block before. So you can see that if I scroll, if I choose different blocks in my drawing, there's no description right here. So it's difficult for me to tell which type or which version is this block. So I'm going to go back to the test object block that we formed today now, and I'm going to click on OK. You can tell now that I'm taken to the block editor tab right here that AutoCAD has naturally or automatically formed. Now you can only get this tab once you double click on a block that is in your drawing. So it's not there automatically unless you activate it by double clicking on the block. And notice how this is now isolated. My block is isolated. There is no more drawing. The rest of the drawings have disappeared. All the versions of the blocks that I added to my drawing have disappeared simply because I am now editing the block itself, or the subfile that is attached to, or what is equivalent to the subfile that is attached to my document. So right now I'm gonna decide that this line is going to be moved, and I will move it just like I move any other item in my drawing. And I'm going to erase some of the lines. I can rescale, I can mirror, I can move, I can do whatever I want here. Once I'm done editing, I'm just going to click on this tick button, and it should ask me whether or not I want to save the changes. So once I click here, I'm going to save the changes, and notice how these changes have affected all the versions in my blocks. So all the blocks that I have inserted in this document have been affected by the change. So this makes my life easier whenever I want to change some things in the drawing, and I know that there were a lot of copies of that. Instead of copying it, so you need to make, if anything changes later on, if you've copied it, then you will have to go to every single copy and make that change or apply that change. Right now, all I have to do is just edit the block, and therefore the changes automatically apply to all the copies of the block. So that is one use of blocks. One more thing, notice how, if I go back to the block editor, right here, notice how all the lines belong to the layer 0. Now, if I change this layer and say I choose glass layer, notice how, even though this is the same block, the color of the line has changed simply because the block is using multiple layers. So the layers have nothing to do with the block. Once I save the changes, you will see that this has affected all the layers. So now the block is an assembly of multiple objects from different layers, and therefore I can have different layers in one block. I can have different colors. And this is what explains, if you go to the properties of any line and you say you have by block, so it follows the color of the block, or the object or the line follows the color of the layer, or it has its own color regardless what layer it's located on. That makes a big difference. Right now I'm gonna erase all of these blocks, and I'm gonna go to a drawing that I already have right here to show you how blocks affected the way we perform the tasks right here. Let me just zoom to this drawing right here. I'm sorry, my scroll is not really responding properly, so I'm going to have to use my keyboard instead to zoom. So you can see that I have one version of the door right here, and another one here, obviously. I'm going to erase this. And I'm going to draw a door, or I've already pre-drawn a door. Let us draw it together. So I'm going to start a new layer and call it doors. And I'm going to give it a brown color, just so it makes sense. And then I'm going to make it the active layer. Now I'm going to start drawing my lines. So now I drew my door, and I'm gonna make this a block. So I'm going to type B for block, hit enter, and then call the block to doors 100 because simply because it's 100 centimeters, sorry, 1000, simply because it's 1000 unit or 1000 millimeter door. And then I'm going to choose the pick point to be here because normally we measure the opening from this point. And then I'm going to choose my objects to be these lines. Then once I'm done drawing, oh wait, I'm gonna remove this line from the selection simply because this line does not really exist. And now I'm going to right click and I'm going to make sure that the allow exploding button is on, it's in millimeters, and I will click on OK. Now notice how this line is not a part of the block, but this is. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go to insert. Once I erase this, I'm going to go to insert, and then I'm going to choose the door. Oh, sorry. And I'm going to place it right here and right here and right here. Slightly too big, so you need to check your measurements. Make sure that you draw the door in the correct measurement. Let's check that together and edit it so that it applies to all the versions that we have added. So let's measure the distance from here to here. That is 1 unit, and the distance from here to here is slightly bigger, so that's 1.015. So I'm gonna double click on the block, select OK, and then offset this to 1. Right here. And so I'm gonna slightly decrease the size of the circle. That one has to be erased, so I'm gonna draw a new circle and place it right here. And then I'm just gonna trim this circle and this part of the circle here. So I'm gonna erase this. And then I'm gonna match properties, MA for match properties, between this line and that line. And once I'm done, I'm gonna hit the button, and then I'm gonna save the changes. Notice how now my door is exactly as big as I want it to be, and it is in perfect dimensions. Now I can also insert the block right here, for instance here, and I want to rotate it. Now here, the rotate order is not gonna affect all the versions, so it's only gonna affect this version of the block. And then I can also mirror it again and say I want it to be mirrored along this axis, and I want to erase the original version or the original copy. Oops, so I should have hit yes instead of no, but that's fine, I can manually erase it. So this is how easy blocks make it for us to duplicate objects without having to redraw or copy the object multiple times. And it also allows us to edit our objects as we find appropriate. Now, what if I wanted to insert this block right here instead of this small door? So I can either draw it and form a new door or a new block and call it small door, or door, I don't know how big it is, or I can simply just copy this and place it here, mirror it, so it is where I want it to be. I can move it as well and place it right here. Now to rescale it, right now I'm gonna have to explode this particular item because I want the changes to happen on only this version. So I'm gonna explode it, and because I allowed the explosion of this block, I can always explode it and edit it individually as single lines. And you can see how now the block has returned to its original objects, and it's made up of multiple lines and circles that can be individually edited. So I can easily change this and drag it here. Oh, sorry, redraw the circle so that it starts here and ends here, and then start trimming it and edit it as I find appropriate. And so it will not affect any of the objects that I have added before, any of the blocks that I've added before. So it's in a way liberating itself from the block constraints. So I highly recommend you practice blocks and you understand the limitations and the possibilities that blocks offer you in making your drawings easier, and it accelerates the process or accelerates the time that is taken for you to execute a drawing or produce a single drawing. I hope this helps. Please watch the next tutorial to know how we edit attributes that in blocks and how we add attributes and what are attributes. I'll see you then.